Today, we're joined by Salim Rahemtulla, President and CEO of PowerTap Hydrogen Fueling Corp. With a background that spans naval leadership, real estate development, and over a decade in renewable energy, Saleem brings a multidimensional perspective to clean energy leadership. Saleem's unique journey led him to helm PowerTap, a company revolutionizing hydrogen infrastructure through modular on-site production systems. Under his leadership, PowerTap is not only scaling clean fuel access, but also positioning hydrogen as a practical solution for today's energy challenges. In this episode, we'll explore his leadership strategies, how PowerTap is changing the game in hydrogen fueling, and his bold vision for the future of energy systems and workforce development. Saleem, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Greg. I'm glad to be part of it and excited to share with you some really important, I think, leadership perspectives that I've developed over the past 30 or so years.
Well, let's jump right in there. I mean, your background is super impressive, right? Started in the Navy, went into real estate, and now energy tech. What leadership lessons have stayed with you throughout your journey?
There are a few things. I would say that servant leadership is what has really enabled me, is really being there to support the people in providing them the resources they need and the capabilities that they require from a training perspective, kind of the broad range. If you don't provide the resources for your people, then what is your job really? Certainly throwing hurdles in front of your people, and certainly I'm not suggesting that that's what people do, but sometimes it happens. And I think that we just have to shift our mindset into just supporting our people. Ultimately, yes, you're the leader of that group, subgroup, whatever it is, but if you're not providing for your folks, then that's problematic. I think another aspect is making sure there's mutual respect in an organization, both directions, from the leader down to folks that are supporting that leader, vice versa. From the janitor all the way up to the CEO, there should be mutual respect. I think one of the more challenging areas rather is motivating people. And there's also a perspective of your basic rules that you think would apply may not. And that requires you to really apply in a maximum way emotional intelligence. Everybody's different, and it's pretty clear that's the case. You have, people ranging from the engineers to the administrative folks, and they think differently. There are things that are going on in everybody's lives that are different. So you just have to really work on learning emotional intelligence, and that's not something you've learned in day one for sure. It takes years and decades to really hone those skills.
I imagine there's a bit of your background, right? Your journey, starting out in the Navy, that has contributed to the way that you view servant leadership, you view empathy, you view learning, and feeling, and essentially figuring out what people are going through and adapting to them. So can you tell us a little bit about your path to becoming president and CEO of PowerTap?
Sure. I mean, it's a wide and varied path, actually, but it's really focused on real estate. It just turns out. And when I think real estate, I think assets like renewable energy as well. But I'll tell you, the path is this: starting in active duty in the Navy. And it's really my last role that I had. I was at Naval Air Station Miramar as the public affairs officer, assistant public affairs officer. And that led me to a role where I was ensuring that in conjunction with the public, especially real estate developers, that we were preventing encroachment on our military flight paths. And you think, well, how does that kind of play in? Well, just kind of briefly describe it. So we flew aircraft over land to the ocean, over the Pacific Ocean. And that meant we flew over real estate, people operating in retail centers and daycare centers and in schools and housing and so on and so forth. And so we had to alter our flight paths to avoid certain areas. And what are the concerns? There's height restrictions. There's noise, obviously from jets, and then you have accident potential. Between those three things, you have to monitor how development is going and prevent yourself from impacting the community. And the way we controlled that at the military installation is that we had a comprehensive land use plan with the city of San Diego. And through that interface, I was able to work with developers out in town and really get an appreciation of what it's all about in terms of real estate development and, of course, incompatible uses, compatible uses for that matter. And that really excited me. And that got me into doing public sector real estate, where we were doing a conversion of the Naval Air Station at Miramar to a Marine Corps Air Station as base closure started to manifest itself in the mid to late 90s. And that meant a $600 million project over 3 years, where we did a 60,000 square foot medical dental facility, 300,000 square feet of warehouses and magazines and hangars. And so there's hangars, and there's aircraft facilities, aircraft parking areas, runways for fixed wing aircraft, which means helicopters, CH-46s, CH-53s. There's rotary aircraft in general, and KC-130, C-130s, and F-18s. And so if you want to get into aviation, we can do that. But a broad range of facilities, including 3,000 units for the Marines to live in, brand new housing, and a huge wet and dry utility infrastructure package to support all those new real estate uses, all those new property types.
Wow. So, I mean, that was a really complex project that spanned a lot of different areas you had to learn about.
Absolutely.
Obviously, there's the civil, there's the mechanical, right? You're developing infrastructure, developing housing, running utilities in. And so multi-dimensional project management.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that led to a different area, but it was the closure of the bases that just got emptied out and moved it to Miramar.
Mm-hmm.
They were coming from Marine Corps Air Station El Toro and Marine Corps Air Facility Tustin. And that whole base closure, the disposition of assets that the government goes through and handing those over to developers. And it's not a quick process, I'll tell you that. Of course, you're going from public sector to private sector there. But it's an exciting opportunity. In conjunction with that effort, I went back to school and got an MBA in real estate finance and development. And that led me into a private sector real estate career, doing construction lending and portfolio management with banks. And then going over to do military family housing production and development, to single family homes, luxury homes, and then multifamily housing. And that all led me back to the government when the housing market fell down in the 2008, 2009 timeframe. And luckily I had those strong connections in the government at the time. And I went back to work for the commanding officer of Naval Base Ventura County, doing that same encroachment prevention that I mentioned earlier that I did at Miramar, but with a lot more experience and a lot more capability, being able to really talk with real estate developers, having been one myself, and communicate them the necessities of maintaining the military mission while enabling them to do the things that they needed to do. Make money from real estate, all those kinds of things. Provide for the needs of the communities, right? Which is really exciting stuff. And as part of that, part of the approach was in preventing encroachment was to retain the military mission. And in doing that, it was ensuring that we could be independent from the grid. And so one of the taskers that I was given was to really focus on enhancing or enabling renewable energies. So gasification of old landfills, for example, taking all that bio waste and converting it to power. And that's when my interest got really peaked into renewable energies as another type of real estate, RE, right? RE, renewable energy, RE, renewable energies, or real estate, right? And that got me into working on projects that weren't really necessarily workable in a place like California or stateside. And so I did offshore project development for gasification projects in Vietnam and the Philippines. So that was exciting to understand what a different culture is and how that looks at the development of real estate projects, in this case, renewable energy. So that was exciting, and I think that really piqued my interest in more ways than not. And then it gave me the opportunity to start being the connector point between financial sources and technologists in enabling projects with the financial aspect. It really helps to have that background behind you, and then understanding how project development works and being able to translate that into physical action. Yeah, and that brings us to sort of today, where I had introduced the technologist producing this hydrogen technology in a small footprint on site at fuel stations to a financial source that could say, yeah, we love this project. We want to support you on it. Let's go. So that's the story, start to finish.
Awesome journey, kind of walking us through, starting in the Navy, right? Doing a lot of project development, multidisciplinary, kind of managing a number of different projects for the Navy, and then moving into real estate, right? Obviously doing a lot of real estate development, still military focused, then getting into the renewable space, right? That's what piqued your interest.
Yeah.
And then the lessons that you learned from connecting, right? The renewable energy with the financing that ultimately makes it possible.
Right.
And so kind of curious, all of that put together in a nutshell, what do you think are some of those key lessons that you learned, right? That made you be able to essentially transition so seamlessly into that renewable energy space?
Oh, wow. Not seamlessly, but certainly with some of it. but I appreciate it, because sometimes the most, I don't know, right? Anyone's accomplishments sometimes look easier from the outside, right? And it takes a lot of effort, a lot of work. But anyway,
in the rear view mirror, it looks seamless.
Right. Absolutely.
I'm sure it's very difficult during the time. But maybe what are some of those lessons that you learned that made you successful?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that one needs to be thinking about as they develop real estate, and that includes renewable energies, is, does it stand alone without incentives, for example? Is it financeable? Is it bankable? Does this project make sense? Is an investor going to say, I love this, I get my returns? Great. So I think that's probably lesson one. The other thing is that it's really important to establish and build relationships for collaboration, especially in a brand new industry. We can be competitive, and that means your industry will never take off. And this is not an everyday effort, right? This is not something that happens every day, I'm really saying. At the beginning of a new industry, and hydrogen's a brand new industry. So there's the collaborative aspect of that. It's really relying on experts, right? There's not any realism to you doing a project all alone. You need a team of people. You need support from the team, and that gets back to the whole idea of servant leadership. It's where you need to provide your team the resources they need, and you know that you need the people more importantly than anything else. So those are probably a few leadership lessons that I've learned along the way, and just business lessons, right?
In that sense of getting the right people around you, right, is incredibly important, because you're as smart as your team, you're as powerful as your team, right? You can't do it all yourself. You need other bright-minded individuals around you. And I know with PowerTap, right, obviously a newer technology that you're trying to bridge the gap, get it financed, right, commercialize it. What sort of leadership challenges have you faced in transitioning PowerTap into commercialization?
Yeah, I think a really important sort of leadership issue is retaining humility. Yes, you've gotten to a point maybe where you've made some accomplishments. Doesn't mean you know everything for sure. I think that kind of informs a challenge that presented itself as I'm working, especially in the hydrogen industry, with a lot of really highly technical individuals that are at the top of their game. And it really brings you down to a point where you see where you fit. And even though you're at the lead of a group, it does not mean that you're the smartest guy in the room, and it should never be that way. But I think that's a really important perspective, especially if you're dealing with technical people, is you need to get to the point where you're learning from them. If you're not open to learning and becoming a better person, then that's not going to work real well for those kinds of folks. Of course, that works with just about anybody anyway, also.
Sure. And is that a leadership principle that stuck with you since your time in the Navy?
Absolutely. I mean, it all ties in with the emotional intelligence I mentioned earlier. Is really understanding people, right? And part of that is having humility in just the daily approaches. And being in a position where you're barking orders is not going to be beneficial. Even in a military
Right.
environment, I've seen this before. There are all kinds of leaders in the military, and you have the soft-spoken admirals all the way down to the barking sergeants, right? And not to say that there aren't roles switched in that way. They're the
Sure.
soft-spoken sergeants and the barking admirals too, right? It goes both ways.
Right.
I think it just
Right.
enhances your need to focus on improving your emotional intelligence. That's sort of a big, really big, important lesson to learn, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I know that you and I kind of have a similar past here where we both managed, teams of both unionized and non-unionized employees. And I'm curious if there's any common themes in the way that you show up as a leader that you've learned from managing in both of those environments, and maybe how managing unionized team members, right, in a highly unionized environment has shaped your view on managing talent and building trust.
Sure, the military experience helps a lot, especially if you're a leader, a naval officer, an officer in my case. Contrary to popular belief or even understanding, the military environment is similar to a union environment from the perspective that there's a set of rules. We all know the Uniform Code of Military Justice in the military, and it's very similar to the collective bargaining agreement on the unionized side. Yes, there are demands that might come across that seem extraordinary, but you really need to think about, it goes back to that leadership perspective where you're supporting your people. And if you have that mindset, then that helps a tremendous amount in terms of working with unionized labor forces. If you're abiding by the CBA and working in a communicative, integrative way with the union, then you're going to be in much better shape than if you weren't working in those ways. It doesn't mean it's all smooth and a path of roses and just I don't know, ice cream shops. But it's a tough path, but you have to keep those mindsets at the top.
Totally. All right, let's transition a little bit. I'm very curious about innovating hydrogen infrastructure, right? And so I know PowerTap has some ambitious goals for 2025 and beyond. Can you kind of peel back the curtain a little bit? Tell us a little bit about what PowerTap's goals are for 2025 and what you're doing to achieve them.
So a lot of it has to do with being in the right place at the right time in terms of available real estate. We've got a great model with some solid partners that have the right kind of real estate for us. And that's probably going to light our path forward. It's difficult, there's no doubt. Entitlement is a real challenging issue. Permitting is another issue. And in between all that, you have interconnection, working with the utilities to make sure that you've got the power that you need, establishing, like in the pre-discussion, we talked about microgrids, putting microgrids in place temporarily, and even having them as backup once you've got interconnection at a certain point. These are all issues that we're facing, and that's aside from commercializing technology, where in particular with PowerTap, we have the first generation and second generation technology that's out there, TRL9, that's technology readiness level of the highest that you can get, to a third generation of technology that we're putting out that at its pure face, it's going to be in the TRL 4 to 5 stage. And how do you convince people that this is really going to work? And obviously there's that platform we have with the Gen 1 and Gen 2. We've made it work. This is just a 10x production level from the original production level. And it just means that you have to learn to communicate both with the technologists, the technical guys, the mechanical and the chemical engineers that are developing the technology, all the way to the city councils and the planning commissions that you're communicating with to get your final approvals on things. And then don't forget your project engineer at the utility, right? You got to work with all those folks. So yeah, we've got an ambitious plan. It's going to take a lot of effort. It's going to take building the right team and tapping into those skills that are really important there.
And I do want to touch on your Gen 3 modular units. I want to talk a little bit more about that, right? Obviously, taking what might seem like a step back from how mature it is compared to your current product. But maybe we just start by, right, PowerTap's model is on-site hydrogen production at gas stations,
right,
which is very unique.
At fuel
Can you, At fuel stations.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that and why it's such a game changer? And then let's jump into the technology.
Sure. I think the most important thing to keep in mind is in the current model, and this applies to petroleum products as well, diesel or gas, is you have to deliver the hydrogen or the petrol, the gas, the diesel to the site. What our particular technology does is it produces it on site. The most significant and expensive aspect of getting hydrogen to a fuel station is the transport. So what we do is we eliminate the transport. Obviously, there's a cost to that. It's probably the most significant cost of getting hydrogen to a site or having availability of hydrogen at your dispenser is that distribution. And if you're thinking from a decarbonized society standpoint, then it makes the most sense to produce on site where you eliminate methane leakage and these sorts of things that give you some sense. We use natural gas to produce our hydrogen in the current form. Eventually, we'll get to a point in a decade or two or maybe three that we'll use water to produce our hydrogen. H2O, that's something that's in the offing. I'll tell you that from an efficiency standpoint, methane reformation, steam methane reformation, which is the technology we use, is going to be more cost effective and efficient. Now the question would come, why do we need to decarbonize? Some people feel that decarbonization really isn't necessary. And I think the perspective would be, and maybe I'll say something controversial, that the environment is changing. And why wouldn't we get ahead of it, regardless of why we have that happening? Is it human created? It doesn't matter. It's happening. So let's try and get ahead of it. And a lot of people would say, well, I mean, it's too huge to get ahead of. So what does it mean? We don't try? No, that's how we've gotten ahead as a nation, is by getting ahead of things, regardless of how big we think they are.
And I think that's the interesting part, when talking with you, is you have a product that works. It works well, right? It's already very clean. And I know we're going to dig into that here in a little bit later in the podcast. But you're already looking ahead to figure out how can we make it cleaner, right? Like that's, I think, the power that PowerTap brings as far as the visionary for the future of hydrogen.
Yeah, absolutely. We can be stuck on a particular technology, but we like to say we're technology agnostic, not from the perspective that, it doesn't matter what we use right now. No, it does matter. Whatever's the most cost-effective, appropriate way to produce hydrogen based on our context. If I was in the middle of, I don't know, near the Hoover Dam, and it was a rainy season, then obviously my hydrogen production would be different than if I was in the middle of the desert in California. So it's context-based. I think that's a really important point to make there, technology-wise.
Got it. That makes sense. And thanks for taking the step back and kind of walking the team through your technology. And so now let's talk about, you've obviously got developing hydrogen at your fueling station, like that's your main product that you're delivering. And then you have a new Gen 3, it's the modular units. Can you tell us a little bit about how those differentiate from what you're currently producing?
So the Gen 1 and Gen 2 is also modular. I think the key differentiator is that we were producing with the Gen 1 and Gen 2 50 kilograms of hydrogen. We paired two SMRs together to make 100 kilograms per day. What the Gen 3 does is it increases that production up to 1,250 kilograms per day. And the challenge is getting it done in a small footprint. And we've overcome that challenge with the specific technology and IP that we have to bring to the table. So that's the enhancing aspect of it. And we can do that in under 2,000 square feet in terms of the production aspect of it. And the creation of the hydrogen to a point where at the dispenser, it's 5 nines of hydrogen, meaning that it's 99.999% clean, which is critical for fuel cells, because you certainly don't want to foul fuel cells. That's a critical piece for FCE vehicles, fuel cell electric vehicles.
Got it. Okay, so the Gen 3 basically just ramps up your ability to produce hydrogen on site.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Cool.
If you think about it, quickly wanted to mention, a light-duty vehicle fills at around 6 kilograms. It's 8 kilograms, but depending on pressure and temperature and so on and so forth, about 6 kilograms. And a heavy-duty vehicle has a 70 kilogram capacity. So do the math. You get
Yeah.
a little bit more
1,200
than 200
kilograms in a day.
Yeah, exactly. A little bit more than 200 light duty vehicles and something like, 40 or so, 30 to 40 heavy duty vehicles.
Got it. And then do you know what like the MPG equivalent comparison between hydrogen and gas is? Are they pretty neck and neck?
It's pretty comparable. And it's the beautiful thing is that it's the fueling experience that we're all used to. There isn't a long charge time that you need to plug into the vehicle for an hour or 45 minutes or 8 hours for that matter, depending on the efficacy of the charger into which you're plugging. It's a short fueling requirement of 5 to 7 minutes for a light duty vehicle, 20 to 30 minutes for a heavy duty vehicle, and the ranges are comparable. So for a light duty vehicle, 350 to 450 miles, depends on how heavy your foot is. And similar for a heavy duty vehicle, it gives you that 800 kilometers or 1,000 kilometers, 500 to 800 miles, that kind of thing, range that you need in a heavy duty truck.
That makes sense. So very comparable. And hydrogen often gets criticized for inefficiencies, right? And I imagine a lot of what you have to do is educate individuals or the people that you're working with, speaking to, whether in the government or if they're investors, on the fact that no, actually hydrogen isn't inefficient. So can you tell us a little bit about like, what's your pitch?
So there are inefficiencies. There's no doubt there are inefficiencies. But I think the thing to be thinking about is what we talked about in the pre-discussion. And that is that there are times during the day when there's a lot of solar electricity, for example, solar energy rather, that you can capture. But if you don't have anywhere to dispatch it to, or you can't store it in a battery that's only in the last 8 hours or so, then you let it go. You curtail the production of that energy, right? With hydrogen, you can capture it. So that kind of eliminates the discussion of the efficiencies because you can't do anything with that energy anyway. So now if you put it into hydrogen, you've been able to do something with it and you've created something from almost an unlimited, no, it is an unlimited source from the sun, right? Especially in the desert of California, for example, or anywhere in California, Southern California, I should say. So there's that. And I think that the perspective should be, we should be thinking about an all of the above energy strategy. Sure, electrification is good to a point, but at a certain point, you're going to max out the grid in its current configuration and condition. And at a certain point, you have to either bring a lot more infrastructure to the picture in terms of electricity, transportation, call it. I guess distribution should be the more appropriate word there. And we should be thinking about such solutions as hydrogen that is created from a decarbonized form, blue hydrogen or green hydrogen, either from natural gas that's blue or water electrolysis that's green. And even biomass is considered a green hydrogen production. It's just done a little bit differently. You need to gasify it, make sure that your emissions are low, and then convert it to hydrogen using a gasification unit or there are other methods, right? So there's that. We should be thinking all the above, and that should include biofuels as well. We've got waste that comes from our dairy farms and pig farms, and why don't we use that waste? And that's partly where we're producing our hydrogen, as we have a split of 40% renewable natural gas or biomethane, and 59 to 60% of fossil gas as well.
I didn't realize you had that high of a split. So you have quite a bit of the bio waste basically allowing you to create hydrogen.
Yeah, and that's by requirement. The low carbon fuel standard carbon credit requirements here that 40% of our hydrogen production be from renewable sources. So that's an aspect that's really important. That's going to change to 80% in 2030. So that demand will get a little higher in California. I'm not sure if that's going to apply to other states across the country. It will in certain states, but we differ our process for every context difference, right?
Got it. No, and let's start bridging the gap now, because I'm very curious. You talked a little bit about EVs, right? Battery power versus hydrogen. Before the call in our pre-meet, we were talking a little bit about microgrids, right?
Yep.
We live here in California where We have major, wildfire waves, right?
Right.
Windstorm events that cause us to sectionalize our grid to keep people safe. And so you were talking a little bit about like one of the methods of providing backup generation is battery. Another could be hydrogen.
Yep.
So can you tell us a little bit about what that would look like in like a microgrid setting?
In a microgrid setting, you can do a few things. One of the aspects is that you can use the natural gas that we've been talking about here to produce energy directly. You can also use it to extract hydrogen and use that hydrogen to charge electric vehicles via a fuel cell. You can also fuel natural gas vehicles in that environment. That microgrid, the beauty of it is that it's behind the meter. So it enables you to get ahead of interconnection timelines and install that in a place that makes sense remotely. And then in the situation that you just explained, you can really see even producing hydrogen at one of our hubs, for example, and taking it into via a hydrogen generator to a place where there's no grid at all, or the grid has been shut down for some reason, maybe to prevent wildfires. So you can use that hydrogen in that form via fuel cell again to provide electricity where you don't have it or you can't have it.
That's very interesting. I love hearing about the different use cases, right? Where you could support communities who may be out of power, right? Due to safety concerns. And hydrogen is just another method of doing that.
Right.
And so now let's talk a little bit about hydrogen versus batteries, right? I know that there's a lot of debate around hydrogen versus BEVs. So what's your take on this so-called rivalry?
Yeah, I alluded to that earlier, right? It's context-based. I think that we should be thinking in the form of an all of the above strategy as opposed to it's only electrification and that's all we should be pursuing. It doesn't really make a lot of sense because in the current environment, batteries are heavy. And when you've got a long haul that you've got to travel and you've got a lot of stuff to carry, weight is really important. And so you'd want to have some propulsion system that's lighter than big heavy batteries, which take an 82,000 pound vehicle, for example. The battery could be up to 20,000 pounds. And so you'd want to have a comparable propulsion system to a diesel in the range of maybe a couple of thousand pounds, and then use the rest for freight, which is really important. So I think it depends on the context. Let's put it that way. If you're doing local hail rides, for example, Uber rides in downtown San Diego, okay, great. Uber makes great sense. But if you're traveling from the port of Long Beach to the port of Houston, then maybe a hydrogen fuel cell electric truck would make good sense, right? And so it varies as to what you're doing. If you're doing local delivery routes in downtown San Francisco, then that makes sense to have a battery electric truck, like a FedEx vehicle that's battery electric. Or natural gas for that matter. Yes, the emissions are there, but they're less than they would be for a diesel vehicle. So we just have to step back and look at things in an all of the above strategy and base it contextual.
Got it. That makes sense. And so from a long haul perspective, right? I mean, the example that you just gave where maybe a battery for a long haul truck is going to weigh 20,000 pounds, right? And the hydrogen cell, right, for a long haul truck might only weigh a couple thousand pounds, right? Like, it's a huge difference.
Yep.
And imagine the energy to move that forward is obviously significantly less. So that's an example of a use case for long haul trucking. But I've also heard that hydrogen could be a good source for data centers and industrial applications. Can you tell me a little bit about why hydrogen is a good choice for those applications as well?
Again, it's power availability. If you have a requirement for 24-hour power, then you created hydrogen using solar energy. Then when you're in the middle of the night and there's no solar capacity or capability, you have the hydrogen to take you across that finish line. I'll tell you that that fits in a decarbonized society. So if that's the goal, then hydrogen is going to fill that need, be it for data centers or industrial applications. The other thing that's real important to keep in mind is that I mentioned earlier the requirement for fuel cell electric vehicles to have 5 nines of hydrogen, 99.999% purity.
Right.
That's not necessarily the case for certain industrial applications. Chemical production where hydrogen is required, steel production where that's not as important. But if you're doing semiconductors, then it's pretty important to have even more pure hydrogen than 5 nines. You'd have to go maybe 6 nines. And that requires an extra cost associated with the hydrogen production method. So there's that aspect. It certainly can be used. Decarbonization is sort of the precept to that. And again, regardless of what your perspective is in terms of climate change, whether it's caused by humans or not, that we should still be getting ahead of the game and trying to produce as many types of energy as we can.
Got it. So maybe before we move on to the next topic, was curious, what's your vision, or PowerTap's vision and plan to support both long haul trucking, right, data centers, infrastructure? Like, what's your vision for how you can fully support, right, the hydrogenation of this consumer group?
I mean, I think the vision incorporates getting back to the context, right? If there's natural gas available, or in the future water availability, then you adjust your production strategy based on what you've got available. If you get stuck on one particular technology, then you can't think that way. So I think it's just taking a step back and looking more broadly. The vision incorporates creativity and just thinking outside of the box, and really pushing towards on-site hydrogen production. It doesn't necessarily work only at a fuel station, but for example, if you took a particular module at a semiconductor plant, or if you had a small backup requirement in a data center, for example, then you could incorporate our small hydrogen production capacity to produce energy or hydrogen that you can put into a generator when you need it as a backup. So I think that's really an area where it makes a lot of sense, and where our unit, or under 2,000 square foot unit of 1,250 kilograms of production, that can be, by the way, scaled up to 8 tons a day, would fit.
Right.
And certainly the 8 tons a day doesn't fit in the 2,000 square foot footprint anymore. Rather, it's more like a 5,300 square foot footprint. So just to give a sense, it's context based, but everywhere where you think of energy use and production more broadly, you can use any tool you have at your disposal. And just to be able to have our hydrogen production methodology at your disposal gives you another arrow in your quiver.
That completely makes sense. And you touched on a couple of things that are going to bridge us into our next topic, right? Building high performing teams in this, quote unquote, new energy industry, right? And so at the beginning of the show, you were talking a little bit about you're working with a lot of technical folks who are, you're not the smartest person in the room. They've got the technical expertise that is going to help make PowerTap successful. But then you also bring a strategic element. So can you talk a little bit about balancing, the need for having the hyper technical folks and the strategy folks on the team, and what you do to support technical and entrepreneurship within your organization?
Yeah, I mean, it's really important in our particular industry because hydrogen is somewhat new. And so one of the things that's really important is taking people who have some basis of technology understanding. And in our case, we would say take the oil and gas workers and upskill them to be able to get into hydrogen. And in fact, that's really important. And, we've through our organizations or in our industry organizations like the California Hydrogen Business Council, we're looking very closely at enabling community colleges, for example, to use PowerTap units for their training purposes, for example, just to give a sense of what the technology is all about. And it's really important to give internships. First of all, it's critical for our tax credits, by the way, to be able to enable a mentorship program, or you have folks that are journeymen, for example, give them the opportunity to learn on your systems. And that's something you're
like upskill, basically providing that opportunity to come and learn while working on your product.
Absolutely. Yeah. 100%.
Okay.
I think that's real important. When you were talking about balancing technical and strategic personnel, I think it goes back to the servant leadership aspect. You set the example of how to work with people, then you can see that being enabled at the deck plate level between the technical folks and the strategy folks, for example, to give the easy example you used.
Yeah, no, and that's super cool to hear that you're partnering with folks. I know that you're partnering with the California Hydrogen Business Council. You'd mentioned LA Clean Tech Incubator as another team that you're partnering with, and then developing those skills internally with mentorship and up leveling. Can you talk a little bit about any particular roles in your industry in hydrogen that are hard to hire for, and what you're doing to bridge that gap?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that I bring to the table is real estate development capabilities, where I've been able to get approvals on entitlements and permitting for all projects of all kinds, from residential to industrial to renewable energies, for that matter. And I think that's a really difficult position to fill, because typically you want someone that has a technical understanding, a mechanical or chemical engineer who can explain the system that we're producing here and the different technologies that we expect to deploy, in conjunction with being able to get in front of a planning commissioner or city council and pitch your project as being beneficial to the community, as well as having them understand the safety aspects of it and the technical aspects explained in the form that they can understand. And so that's probably one of the more difficult positions to fill, is that project manager that requires that blend of skills, technical, safety, and communicative skills to public bodies, and then even in public hearings to the general public, being able to get everybody comfortable with your system that you want to deploy, your thing that you want to develop in their community. That's really important to understand. It's their community, and we're visiting in a way, right?
Right.
And we need to, when in Rome, do as the Romans do to some degree, right? We have to make them feel comfortable with what we're doing.
Absolutely. No, and that's a unique skill set. It's very difficult to take the technical and boil it into words that the layman can understand, right? And so that's an element that I know you do really well and has helped PowerTap grow, right? And so that's really the next, round of individuals that you're going to be bringing on to PowerTap to help you continue to expand, partnering with local governments, and being able to articulate the technical details in a manner that everyone can understand.
Absolutely. Critical skills.
All right. As we get close to closing out here, I did have a couple of questions just about decarbonization, and global energy systems. We were talking a little bit before the call about other countries that are ahead of the game, right? That are ahead of the US in their hydrogen adoption. Can you talk a little bit about those countries and why kind of seeing where they're going is giving you optimism in what you're doing here in California?
Sure. There are countries like Korea and Japan that have done a really good job of promoting hydrogen and fuel cell electric vehicles. They produce them, of course, the Toyota Mirai in Japan, and of course the Hyundai Nexo in Korea, and there are other vehicles that are coming down the pike. I think they've done a really good job of promoting hydrogen in Europe, where there are already fuel cell electric trucks. There are box trucks that are delivering all kinds of goods throughout Europe. So they're in good stead. I think there are other countries specifically in Europe that are ahead of the game, like the Netherlands, Germany to some degree, France for sure. And I think that we can use those guys as examples. One of the things they're doing is not only incentivizing hydrogen, but really setting requirements for the use of fuel cell electric vehicles, for example. I don't know if we'll ever get to that point here, but it would certainly be sort of a good approach to consider, is not only incentivizing with tax credits and carbon credits, but also having vehicle mandates, for example. I mean, I think there's some...
Right, and those vehicle mandates are really just at the center of them, if you think about it, at the core, get into what you were talking about. If you build the infrastructure, right, then people will adopt. And so the incentives are set up to essentially allow you to develop the infrastructure so that individuals would start to buy more hydrogen fuel cell cars, right? So, and that's kind of what you're seeing happening in these other countries, right? and maybe an element of what you're hoping to achieve here in the United States.
Sure, absolutely. In Korea, they've done an amazing job of establishing infrastructure, and no surprise, their vehicle adoption of fuel cell electric vehicles has really manifested itself. And so that's something that we continue to pitch here in California and across the United States.
Awesome. Saleem, this has been a lot of fun. I got 2 more questions for you. Number 1, let's close it out because you're the hydrogen man, right? What is the biggest myth about hydrogen that you wish that more people would understand?
The biggest myth, I think, is the safety aspect, right? Oh, it's explosive, right? Because people think about the Hindenburg and what happened there. And, people don't really realize what actually caused the Hindenburg. It was the fabric that wrapped the blimp that was that thing that caused fire and then caused the hydrogen to blow up. So, people think about hydrogen as being unsafe. And I think something to be thinking about is the fact that hydrogen is the lightest element in the universe. And because it's light, it goes directly up. It's sort of, tends towards vertical, whereas petroleum products end up pooling on the deck, on the ground. And if they pool, they're way more flammable if they pool compared to if you don't provide a place where hydrogen can accumulate in the overhead, then you eliminate any sort of explosiveness. You still have to be careful, and there are certain conditions that are established already in the NFPA that protects us from hydrogen explosions and other sort of catastrophes. Realize that hydrogen has been transported on the roads for the past 80 some odd years and mostly safe. Yeah, there are going to be mishaps along the way, but if you compared petroleum type incidents to hydrogen incidents, you'd see that there are well more petroleum incidences than there are hydrogen. So I think safety is the biggest.
What was the blimp made out of? Was it like a Mylar product?
It was a fabric. And what happened was they went into an electrical storm.
Okay.
And they didn't have grounding thought processes and capabilities at that time. And so what do you get? You get fire.
Big fire in the sky. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, a lot of people think that the Hindenburg exploded. It didn't. It burned. I mean, direct hydrogen, it would be pretty devastating. Think atomic bomb, right?
Yeah.
But there are well more protections in place now because of the Hindenburg incident some 100 years ago.
That makes sense. Yeah. And thanks for clearing that up. Okay. So I like to always wrap with a question about, that kind of gives you an opportunity to provide a bit of advice for other leaders in your industry or in tangential industries that are looking to, develop their leaders and build leadership in order to scale innovation in your particular industry, which is like the emerging energy market, right? So can you tell us a little bit, what's one word of advice that you would give to leaders who are looking to scale innovation in emerging energy markets like yours?
The biggest piece of advice I would give is really focus on improving your emotional intelligence so that you can establish motivational capabilities that empower your employees. That's sort of number one. And train your employees with that same type of capability. Really important. Emotional intelligence is what's going to get us through.
I love it. And you lead by example. Saleem, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. It's been a pleasure getting to know more about PowerTap. Thanks for coming on the show. I'm looking forward to having you on a future one when I go and trade in my Tesla, right?
There you go. Hey, it's been great being part of the Lit podcast. And I'd love to come back, please.
Awesome. Thanks, Saleem. Have a great one.
Take care. You too.